Welcome to the Gravity Well podcast with me, Jenny Araby. I host the Gravity Well to celebrate and share the stories of the people empowering others with knowledge, skills, and plans required to reestablish stability in our communities. Your mission is to work through these heavy issues with me in order to lighten the load. I acknowledge that I live on the traditional territories of Treaty 7 and Métis Districts 5 and 6. The treaties and self-governance agreements established by Indigenous peoples were created to honor the laws of the land, maintain balance with nature, and give back to uphold reciprocal relationships. This knowledge and intention are what guide the Gravity Well conversations. I ask for genuine dialogue, real hearts, and openness to different perspectives. This is your invitation to find common ground with me. Positions taken by participants, either individually or collectively, do not necessarily represent those of the Gravity Well. This podcast is dedicated to the natural world, our children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, and all future generations. The Gravity Well is on YouTube, Substack, and streaming wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you see and hear, remember to like and subscribe.
Thrilled to have Bruce Smedley here again. So we're going to get into what has happened in terms of the government's effort in water. And then we're going to talk about some recommendations that Bruce made, Bruce, myself, and others made. And we'll talk about what the Auditor General report has recently said about this and the School of Public Policy as well. So that's what we're hoping to cover today. Bruce has a master's and bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. He studied in both BC and Alberta. He has 50 years of industry, government, and bank experience, which is like a trifecta in both the public and private sectors. So I'm grateful to know Bruce through the 4C group, so our Concerned Calgarians on Climate Change group that meets Tuesday mornings to help each other, support each other in our learning and our attempt to build solidarity in these really important issues. And yeah, so it's a call for integrated water resource preservation restoration agency. So I'm really grateful to you for doing that, Bruce, and thank you for your time tonight. So is there anything in your introduction that you'd like to add on, or some other background that you'd like us to know about you before we roll?
No, I think that covers it off. I would just add that as a chemical engineer, water and carbon are probably the two items that come up most in all of my work. And it doesn't matter which industry you're actually working in; it's either one or the other.
Yeah. To me, they're one and the same. They can't be separated, right?
Yeah, and everything humans do essentially involves water in one respect or another, and the requirement for water or the use of water in the process.
Alex, did you have anything from Bruce's background you wanted to touch on?
My background has been various industry processes around the world, and commenting on the relationship between the processes being proposed or built or running and how that relates to the community, the culture, and the environment that it's actually placed in. So I see my role has always been the integration of the industry within the society or the culture. And then in the context of doing that on every continent over the last 50 years, I mean, it's given me quite a background in sort of how these processes might unfold and what they might ultimately achieve.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead, Alex.
Have you found that based on your field experience throughout that time, you discovered that the only way to actually get these issues somewhat resolved is to remain apolitical and just focus on the tasks at hand?
Yeah, I tend to be apolitical. Politics is a bureaucracy that is different in every culture and every set of circumstances. And so, I mean, in all the cultures I've been in China or Indonesia or Thailand or North America, for that matter, even in various provinces in Canada, the politics pretty much I can leave out of the process other than to include it as a constraint to getting things done. So I have to try to understand it so that I can understand how things can be moved ahead or modified or fixed or whatever.
Yes, my experience with you, Bruce, is that you're very thorough, focused on data and information and like you said, real people and who's impacted, all those great questions that come with thoughtful decision making. So yeah, I'm just so pleased to have you here to talk about this big issue. So let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about what's going on in Alberta. So we have a drought that started several years ago. We are, in the fall last year, we really saw water levels drop to a scary level. There were 4 communities in southern Alberta that didn't have access to water. They had to have their water trucked to them. And we have a government that looked at this issue and decided to do some modeling, mostly focused in southern Alberta, where there was a crisis of water in southern Alberta. And so one of the comments that has come out from the Auditor General did an analysis of the work that the province has done. And the first thing that they talked about that's a shortcoming is they're not modeling the whole province. The other thing that they've talked about is that there's no conservation objectives in most of the basins. So no expectation of actually trying to conserve water, no mandate from each of the municipalities, nothing to that effect. They don't know even if the existing water conservations objectives are working. So the ones that they do have, they're not sure if they're actually helping us conserve water. There's a lack of a robust process to monitor the water pressure, to assess risk, and decide when water conservation objectives are needed. So we're not even looking at when we should trigger these things. And then there's an ineffective process to approach licenses and monitoring compliance. So essentially saying there's a really poor compliance enforcement. And we have an example from that from one of our guests, Dixon Hammond, back in episode 8. He was telling us that, they had somebody come and look, an inspector came and looked for his creek, and they came back and said it's dry due to climate change. But it turned out that they didn't even know where the creek was. He said, you missed it. It's actually 5 miles up. And so their report was wrong and they didn't want to change it. So these are some of the real life issues that we're seeing on the ground with this. So some of the recommendations they had was to establish a process to identify when to develop and assess and update water conservation objectives. So I like that. I would add that there's still no mention of restoration. We still are in a deficit, right? And then to improve licensing and compliance monitoring process. So to actually know where water is and where it's going and who's using it for what. And then the last suggestion they had was to publicly report relevant and reliable information on managing surface water. So that's one of the big gaps in this that I know from being on the Watershed Stewardship Council coordinating meeting or council, is that there is no surface water analysis happening. The only analysis is happening in creeks and rivers and streams. So it's not a full scope, and those are where the changes are going to happen most. Yeah. So do you want to add to that, Bruce? Is there more?
Yeah, my letter addresses the big picture in a sense, and I call it going up to 10,000 feet and having a look at what's going on. And I think what I'm seeing here is that there's no one looking at the river basin in its entirety, and no one's really looking at the future prospects for the river's ability to actually supply water in the future. So we're entering a crisis here in the sense that we're trying to allocate water along the river system, but we don't even know we're going to have the water there to be able to allocate it. And this comes about primarily just because of the circumstances we're in, in this century in terms of climate change and unpredictable weather patterns. We're getting too much moisture because of the heat. We're getting dry spells. We get droughts. We don't know where they're going to be in the province, to what extent. And we're getting an increased rate at which the glaciers are actually melting. So we have to factor in the fact that we're not going to have later spring water in the system at all. And then we talk about making changes to the river system and whether we're going to build dams or not dams, or whether we're going to reallocate the water around different ownerships and that. And, none of that seems to be coordinated with what we should be expecting in the future. So, that's the kind of perspective I'd like to see. You were mentioning the Auditor General coming back and talking about the data availability in that. When I looked at some of these issues in, for instance, the mining in the eastern United States, a lot of the problem was that a lot of the samples were taken in the wrong places, or just weren't taken from places that were indicative of the actual pollution that was happening, or the actual water flows or anything else. So again, all of that science needs to be sort of working together.
Yes, and being looked to and integrated. So we're
Right.
meeting regularly with communities affected by gravel, which is in one of your statements here. You talk about gravel, sand and gravel extraction need to be considered as well. But in that group, we have people that have wells that are dry, and the recommendation from the province is to truck it in. The AHS says that's not a long-term solution to water management, because of course that trucked water is coming from another place. So what you're saying, Bruce, and I completely agree, is we're not looking at what are we going to have less of in the future. Right now we're looking at, this is what we have and this is the allocation. That's not enough. We need to be looking at, this is what we have. This is what is potentially going to stop coming. Like you said, when the glaciers go, if we're not reversing this boss, then we're going to have less inflow into the system. And the bigger thing, which we haven't touched on, is our border doesn't stop this water. We are at the heart of this issue. We're the taps for, Saskatchewan and Manitoba and down to the Mississippi. So what decisions we make are going to impact these areas hugely as well. Anyway, I'll stop there. Do you agree, or anything around that?
Yeah, no, I pretty much agree with what you're saying entirely. I might have framed it a little bit different, in the sense of this relationship between what we can estimate is going to happen, and what I call a new perspective on the water issue, in the sense of being able to appreciate how quickly it's going to change on us in the next few years, whether or not we want to sustain our reliability of water, in the sense that, right now it should be sort of 98% guaranteed that we're going to get water for the kind of applications we want to use it for. And then the administration and bureaucracy that's going behind the background, and sort of making sure that we have that reliability in the long term. I'm very, very concerned about that not being in place.
Yes, agreed. That we need a structure in place that's very open to the public, looking and measuring forward, so that people can understand the implications of the decisions we're making today.
Right.
And
right.
It's not even a part of the equation right now. The models that they are using, and I know this from being at the Red Deer River Watershed Council meeting, assume water in equals water out. They're assuming that there isn't a loss to, like you said, heat loss and evapotranspiration from the heat loss. So yeah, there's big gaps, not enough eyes on this, not enough dispersed effort. So we can start getting into that. But before we do, I can touch a little bit on the School of Public Policy. But Alex, did you want to weigh in, or did you have any questions or comments around that first?
Yeah, I think you guys both touched on something profoundly important, in the sense that one of the things that I've noticed that bureaucracy consistently does is it stifles proactive measures, specifically with regards to proactive infrastructure modification, in order to not only maintain surface water preservation, but also groundwater reclamation. If we reduce the water table levels to the point where the ground can no longer absorb the surface water, we end up being in real trouble. And it can kind of exacerbate these droughts. So in terms of regenerative farming or field practices, I think that plays an important role in maintaining the water table, so that the reserves can be maintained. And I think there's actually a lot of job opportunities in those types of infrastructure projects, and they're not actually even that high tech. You can plant wetlands, you can dig crescent moons and plant seeds, you can do all sorts of things that are actually just pretty low tech, labor intensive, but low tech. And they could help contribute to maintaining that water table. So I think like based on what I've read on your research and your experience so far, based on the research that Jenny's been doing, her activism, I think these need to be multi-pronged approaches. And I think we need to galvanize multiple different departments, not only governments, but NGOs and, private sector investors to sort of exercise the fundamental understanding that the reality of providing water for millions of people is of the utmost priority. And if we're lackadaisical about it and we kick the can down the road, we may run out, and people can only survive for 3 days without water. That's just biology. So, I think we should actually be a lot more proactive about trying to get to the bottom of this before it's too late. Proactive rather than reactive. That's my country.
Well, I've been looking at some of the articles coming out of Germany and South Africa, actually, and they're talking about water being more valuable than gold. So I think we need to take that kind of approach to it.
100%.
The other thing is that what you're saying there, Alex, I'm not sure that there's planning for how we develop this province in related at all to the water availability. For instance, the city of Calgary wants to grow, and yet we're not even convinced that this is where the city of Calgary should actually be. We maybe should be growing in Canmore, not in downtown on the Bow River here, because we just don't know what the long-term availability of water is actually going to be here. And then you see, for instance, we're approving a lot of developments up towards Banff and Canmore and those places, and whether those developments should go ahead on the basis of the water that will never get to Saskatchewan, I don't really know. I mean, we have to answer these kind of questions, and so that was the other aspect of what I was looking for from this province, was some indication that they're doing modeling, river basin modeling, which is all of the relationship between the rainfall that comes, whether the aquifers are being filled up, and whether or not the usage is meeting the supply, and all of those aspects, plus the social aspects of irrigation water for fields versus urban water uses versus recreational water uses, whatever. We don't even factor in the ducks or the birds, So I'm, or the fish for that matter. I'm just concerned that we're not putting this science together at the level that we need to be able to appreciate what's happening to our own environment. I have to support the fact that there's a lot of very competent people in Alberta that can look at this issue. I think they need some direction and financing from the provincial government to pull this together. I don't like it split into all these river basins and everybody doing their own thing, and there's no comprehensive planning going on in the province as near as I can see. So I'd like to see it be an agency with some accountability, not just agreement amongst friends or different groups along the river basin here, committees. We need somebody who's going to be accountable to what's said and done, and we don't have that right now.
Yeah, this is a really important point, which is, like I said, I attend these watershed council meetings, and they are allowed to advise, but they are not able to say no. For example, I'll be specific. The Bow River dam, this proposed alternate dam, or to expand the Ghost Dam. Number one, we don't even know if we need that expansion. We did expansion work down in Calgary to mitigate for this. Like you said, Bruce, we don't even know if we're going to have water in Calgary, let alone do we need that. And then investing in the natural capital in our eastern slopes. So actually starting to restore the eastern slopes, meaning getting coal mining sites out of the way, getting roads out of the way, getting oil and gas sites out of the way, and actually restoring that forest could have a much greater stability in terms of our water, as Alex brought forward, storage capacity for decades, rather than just thinking about building another thing that we don't even know. And none of the Watershed Council members would even say that that is something to do to mitigate flood or drought. So infrastructure is not a solution that any scientist would propose. And yet it's the only lens that we're looking at things in, instead of backing up and doing this properly. The only other thing I wanted to add before we get into your letter is, Alex helped me think of this, is you were talking about where are we testing versus are we testing in the right places? Well, and it came into my view from one of these Watershed Council meetings. If we're not testing wells, then our likelihood of seeing contamination goes way down. Wells, because contamination generally is heavy. So you'll see it in wells. You're not going to necessarily see it on the surface. So and we're doing a lot of this sampling testing in rivers. I'm not suggesting that isn't important work. It absolutely is. But we need to marry that with the well information. And these landowners are seeing both contamination and dry wells. We need that to be, in my view, to be sampled everywhere. Anyone who has one, that would be great if they were taking regular sampling. So anyway, that's just my first blow at it. But let's get into your letter, Bruce. Is there anything from the School of Public Policy? The one statement I captured from their summary is that they want to superimpose climate change in this modeling, and they want to have regular and robust analysis that's open to the public. Was there anything from them specifically that you wanted to highlight?
Accountability is one thing that we are lacking. Who is going to take on this accountability? Who's going to be the agency responsible? I mean, this is what they're finding in South Africa, that everybody's doing a great job, but nobody's accountable. And so it's not happening. And, there isn't the money to fix what needs to be fixed when it needs to be fixed, kind of thing, because nobody's there to make those decisions and be accountable for them. That's the one aspect of it. There's lots of sort of little bits and pieces here everywhere. The urgency of this problem doesn't seem to be stated anywhere in any of these government reviews. How quickly the weather is changing and how extreme it's changing on both ends. And if you just want to look at the weather patterns in the United States this summer, I mean they've got nothing but floods and tornadoes and hurricanes. I mean it's the financial damage associated with that is massive compared to being ready for it or aware of it or anything. And then we don't have a contingency plan. I mean, look at the city of Calgary. We've got this question of pipe failing and half the city doesn't get water. Well, why is it not designed into the process in the first?
Yeah.
So there is redundancy there. So
right. Go ahead, Alex.
I may have an answer for that. The pipe was designed and installed 49 years ago. So anyone who made the promise that it was a 100-year pipe is dead. Mm-hmm. So there's no accountability when it fails. And these are the kind of built-in redundancies, the can kicking that we tend to see a lot of. And I'm younger than you, but I've seen enough of these built-in redundancies to know that by the time something fails, like no one who's directly responsible for it is going to be held accountable. And it just keeps going that way. So
the city of Atlanta, Georgia there, I think they have the same pipe and they just took it all out and put new stuff in. There is a history of that pipe that's out there if somebody's watching for it.
Well, and this is just it. We saw a failure in the St. Mary Reservoir, the Milk River on the border there. Same timing. And this is like you're saying, it's systemic, right? This is likely pipe that's all across. Well, in fact, we know that the city said 50% of the pipe is of this age and in good condition. Well, if that was in good condition, what does that say about the rest of the good condition? So yeah. There's a many things, as my husband says, as an emergency responder, it's not one thing that causes a crisis. It's many things all at once. So you're right. We have compounding issues. We talk a lot in 4C how we're developing oil and gas, which uses water. We're developing new communities rather than building within the city, which uses more water. We're doing more gravel in more sensitive areas, which uses more water. So we're moving in the wrong direction. We're using more water in knowing that we have a shortage that's coming at us in the future. So let's dive into your. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Yeah, that's really what my letter is about to the government. Is that issue of what I would been suggesting is in the last 20 years we're starting to get the mathematics of complex systems modeling and our ability to actually address a lot of those interrelated factors and get some models built. There's also been a lot of work done throughout the world. I know MIT and places like that, they've come up with, even the University of Saskatchewan, I mean, they've come up with some great models on sort of some of these river basins. And those things need to be checked against the reality of what's really there. And I mean, the reality in the sense that, if you clear cut a certain area, that area isn't as the model might predict. It's got to be in real time here. And then you work on complex models that match and mirror the circumstances you're seeing in the field. And then you throw in variables and do a risk analysis on the variables to see where the whole system can fail or not meet the recovery or the supply demand scenario or whatever. And that takes an institution that should be funded, and it should probably be associated with one of the universities in the province or something like that, where there's some serious people can come and work at this issue. And that's really what this agency that I'm proposing should be doing, which I'm asking the government to consider, is to look at the science and the advances we've made in complex theory and AI and the rest of it, and use it to our advantage.
Yeah, embrace it.
I mean, this mathematics was just a Nobel Peace Prize in Science, I guess, for in 2021, I think it was, or 22. So it's that new that it's well founded, and it's showing up all over the place now.
Yeah. Go ahead, Alex.
If we look at Calgary and urban sprawl, for instance, we have 5,000 kilometers of pipe just within the 780 square kilometers of Calgary's sprawl that we have to maintain. That's a lot of infrastructure maintenance, right? So the scale, like when we start looking at metrics of scale and how the water is delivered or not, that it can help to put things into perspective. And I think in some cases, at least based on my analysis, a lot of people have difficulty understanding the metrics of scale when it comes to that. So I try and come up with a metaphor. I'm like, think of the human body and a circulatory system. So the main feeder line is your abdominal aorta. It's about as thick as your thumb, right? But it delivers the blood to the femoral arteries, to all your major arteries. And then from those arteries, it goes to capillaries, and the capillaries are like the tap in your house, right? And the capillaries make up the most of that circulatory system. But if there's a blockage within any of the chain, like the main feeder line, as a first responder, it would be considered a AAA, like, an abdominal aortal aneurysm, and it's extreme. So in terms of maintaining the flow of that venal system, right, it's really important to recognize that any obstructions within how that system operates can create major, major, major complications. So one of the benefits to what you were saying is the technology's gotten to the point where we can install fiber optics within these systems so that we can use acoustics to monitor flow, stress, all these types of things. And then we can adjust the pumps and regulate things a little more accordingly. Expanding further to our basins and everything, we need to consider which basins are going to be able to be reinforced and hold more water. And then what type of landscaping can be done or wetland projects can be performed so that we can maintain a healthy water table. And as Jenny was saying, remove coal mining operations away from basins, away from groundwater wells, away from these other projects, energy projects that are going on. And then coupled with that, like using the agency that you're proposing to sample all these different locations honestly and apolitically, like, because we got to ask, like, who's sponsoring the sampling right now and why is it biased?
Yeah, I'm proposing an agency like this as a way to address this issue of the cost effectiveness of having some planning here. We need to be able to decide going forward what we're going to actually invest our dollars in. Plus, we have to know whether it's time to take certain things that have been done in the past and take them out of service as much as maintain them. I mean, we can advance different, but unless we have some basis on which we can make those decisions, we're just putting together a lot of pieces, and your circulatory system is going to fall apart or fail, or we may have to amputate Lethbridge and Canmore or something,
Well, like the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, they hosted a call a couple months ago talking about deciding whether or not you stand up a community again after a weather event, an extreme weather event. We need to be asking these questions. You're absolutely right, Bruce. You and I have talked about this in our 4C meeting, to have AI tell us we tell AI, these are the variables we need to know locally. And this is what we're looking for going forward. If we did that in each area, then we would have an amazing way to see the changes, because
Right.
we'd be measuring the same things in the same way across, let's start with Alberta, but then of course across Canada and across the bioregion, right? Not stopping at the borders.
Right. But we need that complex system model before we can ask the AI to find the answer. You know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah.
We need to kind of put the data set together in such a way that we can answer the questions we're going to have to answer going forward.
For sure. And this is where I get excited as somebody who's loves multivariable analysis. That's the key, is we need to find out all of those variables and feed the machine the wise stuff. So let's get into your letter. I'm just going to tee up because it was reminiscent of the conversation I had with Alex at the doors, which was, we're in the Apollo 11 moment. So I used to say we were in the Apollo 13 moment, and Alex corrected me. And what you're saying, Bruce, is we need that reverse analysis happening right now. We need to look at, when this happens, what are we going to do? When this happens, what are we going to do? If these things happen in combination, what are we going to do? So those are all what I understand you're trying to build with this agency. And I want to reiterate, with accountability, we need to understand who is responsible in all of this. And it's got to be stakeholders first and foremost, in my view. So let's talk about your pieces. So you have terms of reference. Can you talk a little bit about your terms of reference?
Yeah, I talked about sort of what we've been talking here about those kinds of things, like coherent social planning and interdisciplinary approach to this, which means that, because water's involved in everything we do in society, we have to get the industry in there. We have to get the amount of water oil companies use, the oil or the water that goes on the fields, the fish, everything that has to. So it's got to be that kind of comprehensive analysis, if you will. We want to look at this whole issue of how the weather's changing and how violently those changes could be and how erratic those changes could be. I mean, we're getting rainfall, but if we don't get the rainfall in the same month that historically we've had, we're starting to affect the whole biosystem. I see in the southern United States, they're getting mangrove trees moving up the shoreline and moving north because the climate's changed so much. You're going to see all of these kind of things that you haven't even really anticipated right now. And so that's that aspect of it. The scope of work is to, the intake, withdrawal, and loss of every drop of water. And that water scenario goes from our expectation that we're going to get rainfall on the mountains, on the eastern slopes, that we will be able to store some of it in the ice, in the snowfields up there for part of the year, that the ice fields are disappearing and they won't be there in the long term, and that whole evaporation that's coming off the forests, and so by the time we actually get water in the river, we get about 25% of what actually falls as moisture. So we can see a lot of clouds go by, but we don't tend to get a lot of moisture and in the river system that we can actually functionally utilize, and redirect and do what we need to. So again, I'm trying to suggest here that there's a lot of water out there that we've got to get much better at preserving and controlling. And
yeah. One of the mechanisms I think of in this, Bruce, and it's hand in hand with the work that Colin and Alex has been involved in as well, is this idea of using the land use agreements, the cumulative impact land use agreements. Those talk about, like you said, all of the industries, all of the players in the area, all of the stakeholders, and including the wildlife. Like you said, it includes species at risk, and it includes all of those natural capital pieces. So I think that's a good way to focus the work. And then, I totally agree that all of the businesses need to be involved activities. And to Alex's point, we don't even really have a plan for local food systems yet. So we need to have a future forward plan with this water that's different as well, right? Our use needs to change.
Well, that's another characteristic here is data collection and information, consistent with the scope of the modeling requirements. I mean, we've got to find the data, scenario modeling and an analysis, and that goes towards extreme weather, financial and institutional risks, government and public response, input, real-time communications about whether we can do this or can't do that. And in questions asked of the model relative to our sustaining food, our health, whether the quality of the water is going to be, whether it's safe to be, and how we deal with the water from a recreational point of view, and all the rest, the ecosystem aspects of it, and long-term sustainability, and then agency accountability and communications with the public and public awareness. Our ability to sort of phone up someone and say, look, we have, the dam's being breached. Can you come and deal with it?
Right.
And then finally, I really talk about an appreciation of the urgency, and finally, government and industry funding of this particular scenario, and putting this whole agency together. So that's really what's in my letter.
Yeah, it's great, Bruce. It covers so much. And when you talk about the forecast modeling, to me, this is a big switch that I think is, well, not I think, it is a part of where we're at in terms of the transition, meaning we're no longer in a place where we can rely on what was. We now need to be focused on this future casting rather than forecasting what we think we have, right?
Right.
It's a big, it's a behavioral switch, I think, that's going to require, like you said, so Alex and I took this complex decision-making course in order to have this conversation, like the host these conversations. So can you speak a little bit about the work itself? Like, to me, I've taken 3 complex decision-making courses now. To me, it isn't necessarily complicated for people to take on. Like, I just want to make sure that we're not people thinking that's for somebody else. That's for somebody who's like, PhD and this and that. This is really just thinking about problems differently, correct?
Yeah, it's like all things that you want to characterize. It comes down to the fact that if there's this ability to understand what the situation that you're in, and you have the opportunity to use something like complex modeling, there's 4 or 5 different kinds of approaches to complex modeling, and you find the one that's suitable for this particular type of application. You put together the data set that you could find. You make assumptions about the other data sets. You do an analysis of how how substantial or how credible your model actually is, with the information that you have, and then you fill in the gaps to make your model more robust. And so it's just a process of it's purely an academic process, really. But you have the people in Alberta, I'm sure, that can take that kind of task on and deal with it. You have to focus them in a place, make that institution exist. This is this agency I'm talking about, and fund it for 20 years, not fund it, on the next political cycle. You have to fund it so that it's credible and it's accountable.
Right. Yeah. So what I mentioned, the Save the Slopes campaign, and Alex and I, we talked about last week on the show. We have Andy Kubrin helping us now, and you met him this week too, Bruce. So one of the aspects so we went through this exercise exactly like you're talking about, this future casting approach. What are we trying to do? And we landed on, talking about one of these specific gravel communities. Let's take a municipal district, and get them standing up this information as much as they can, standing up what they want to see as much as they can. So I'm thinking of, to your point, yes, this needs to be funded. At some point, we're going to need to have actual figures and regular monitoring, which is going to require that. But I think it comes from a well-coordinated ask from the residents, from the stakeholders, from the people all impacted by this, with some of those questions asked and answered already. Like, for example, we don't want gravel here. We want wetlands, like Alex said, right? We don't, and for that to be, enough of a voice from the community that it can't be ignored. I think that that's where my head's at, because let's talk about your response. You did receive a response from the province. Can you speak a little bit about what you got back from the province?
Yes. The letter that I got back is really a letter from the minister saying that it's all under control, and we have these various aspects in place that should account for your concerns. It doesn't answer my question at all. It doesn't respond to yes, we can do this, or no, we can't. It's more a kind of a feel-good letter. So it's a political letter. It's not a response to an ask, if you will, or the credibility of the problem, or even suggesting that they understand the urgency of what I'm suggesting is happening here. So time, degree, aspects of the problem we're facing, it's not being managed. It's not. So I have no assurance that anything's changing at all.
Go ahead.
Have you found that recent years there's more filibustering when you write a very specific letter that addresses specific points, and then you end up just kind of getting a gaslight or a filibuster and like a form response, where it's just kind of like, it's almost like a pre-pressed response letter where they say, oh yeah, we got everything under control. Or, we've taken your concerns under advisement and blah.
Yeah, that's very common. It doesn't matter which culture I'd ever worked in or which government agency anywhere around the world. The first response is always, well, don't worry, I've got it all under control. That's just fundamental politics, really, or bureaucracy, if you will. For me, my success doesn't come from them ever doing what I ask. It comes from opening up the conversation so people get involved, and then they can kind of drive the problem forward, if you will. I'm trying to say there's a bigger world out there than what we're kind of looking at, and so I'm never sure how it's ever going to end up. I'll give you an example. I wrote an environmental assessment for a coal mine in Thailand, and I heard about it 8 years later when I happened to be down there again talking to a professor at the university there, and he said, your EIA was the only one that told us what we should be looking for in the future, and we made it mandatory in all the other EIAs we ever did after that. But I never knew about that for 8 years. I mean, it just,
Wow.
it was just fortunate that it ended up being that way, that I had another chance to go back and see what had actually happened. So I'm not optimistic. I mean, I did a big study for the oil and gas industry in Mexico on climate change, and I didn't get any response back from them. But the government turned around and sold the properties to the private sector so that they had to deal with the problem. So I suspect my letter was sort of help them make that decision about moving the responsibility maybe to someone else who could actually deal with it. So you never know how it's going to turn out. But unless you go forth and sort of propose that these things need to be done, and get the conversation going, which is really what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah. And thank you. Like, I just want to be clear. This is another example where we're not getting leadership from our government to understand that this is urgent, it is severe, and it requires a lot of people to be working on it in a very transparent way. So this is where we need people listening to understand that we're shaping this. It's up to us. And that's why Bruce is here. So thank you so much, Bruce, for taking the time to do this. I do want to talk a little bit about accountability. If you can expand on that a bit, Bruce. I can tell you some things like I was saying, stakeholders first. To me, when I'm saying stakeholders, I mean landowners, I mean Indigenous communities, I mean, even Indigenous lands. Like one of the things that I tried to actually get Keepers, but they're on one of their conferences right now, Keepers of the Water, to talk with us today, because they've put out a letter requesting that Indigenous participation be primary and equal with the government's actions. To me, I think that is a wildly helpful first start to get us in a place where we have that piece of accountability, especially when we have sort of two eyes across the table. Also, the KIPA, Kainai ecosystem, sorry, I'm not remembering their acronym, but they're looking to do a water treaty, or not the right word, but, again, to have all members of society understand that we need to, water is something we have to stand up for and be active about. So I guess, can you talk a little bit more about accountability? Anything that you see in there?
Yeah, there's several aspects to that. I mean, when we had the big flood here in 2013, I think it was, there was a lot of damage done to the downtown city of Calgary, but the actual damage that was done downstream that scenario, and so even just the kinds of response that during a flood or something like that, those kinds of things have to account for everybody in society, not just those that can deal with it politically. So I think it's another group in the society or social context that we need to put into these kind of modeling scenarios. I don't think anybody has right more than anyone, because we're all human and we all need water. So I think we're 80% water as it is, or something like that. So it's not like there's any uniqueness to being a different kind of animal. I mean, we are all need to be equitably treated across the board in terms of what should be done. When you start talking about agriculture versus urban, we waste a lot of water, and I think it's going back and looking at that problem and saying, look, why are we trucking in vegetables from South America, when we could be growing them right here on top of buildings and distributing them within a 5-block area. They even lower the ceiling down at night so that they don't have to keep moisture in the whole building at night. There's all kinds of scenarios that happen here that Calgary would be perfect for that.
The Dutch actually have been practicing vertical gardening for over a decade, and inside of that decade, they become one of the second largest producers of vegetables, right?
Yeah.
And if we want to reduce our carbon footprint, there's no reason why we should be burning 20,000 liters of diesel to ship strawberries from Mexico when we can grow them in places like Red Cliff, just outside of Medicine Hat. It's one of the largest greenhouse operations in North America. And it's all locally produced. It's organic. They can control the light. It's aeroponic, so it minimizes the water usage. And it's just better food. No need for pesticides. And so there's no reason tech-wise why we can't use some of these empty skyscrapers to implement the same technology. You know, and it's a huge cost savings if we were to just maybe convince enough people, plant that seed, convince enough people that it was a good idea, you know. And I've been fighting for that for a while.
That's why I want to get into this complex modeling, though. I you know, these small items that, you know, you think are sort of not really relevant are very relevant to a complex model. I mean, you can change the whole model by basis of one factor that looks rather small, and it's because everything's interrelated. Whatever you do here affects what happens there, and we have to understand that. We have to understand how those things evolve. The other thing is that there's no going back. Once we start changing something, we've changed the whole script, and you can't go back to recreate that normality you thought you had. So we have to be careful going forward. We can't just build a dam here, there, and everywhere because it happens to be within our budget. You know, we have to build a dam where, you know, we know it's not going to affect all of these other scenarios. You know, recreation or too much evaporation or whatever. So. Plus, there's a lot of things that we should be doing, you know, to make sure that we don't have a hot island in the city, so that we have to air condition everything. You know, I mean, there's just so much that's interrelated. But the fact we can't ever go back, I think people have to understand. There's no turning back. We have to plan where we're going more.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Bruce, because I think we do keep looking back, right? Oh, this is the solution we did last time, so we're going to keep doing that same solution. And we have to stop convincing ourselves that something that failed in the past is something we should invest in the future. So I see we're close to the hour. And so I would love to I'm just going to do a few takeaways from me, if we can just do a round of takeaways. And so I'll go ahead and get us going. So I just want to touch on the letter again. So Bruce is calling for an integrated water resource preservation and restoration agency. We want it to be independent, apolitical, interdisciplinary, intercultural, autonomous, and has the authority to use and demand and forecast data for the public. In that, there's specific terms of reference, which means that it's open to many people. It addresses resource conflicts, external disruptions, climate change, all the big ticket items that we need to have put into this model. The scope of work includes all water in all levels and everything at scale. To Alex's point, we need to make sure that everybody has the same measuring system scale in mind. Adequate data collection and information, so making sure it's public and that it's happening widespread and where it needs to be happening. Scenario modeling. So again, this is the what happens if and what are we going to do when that happens scenarios. And analysis of that. What did we miss? Like you said just now, Bruce, if we change this one thing, holy smokes, that changes everything. You know, those low hanging fruit things, you know, like Alex just said, shipping strawberries from Mexico. This is something that's not complicated. I've been doing my best to support farmers markets, support local, buy local as much as possible. This is something we can do right now that will have a massive impact on the way our food is shipped and stored and used and all those wonderful things. Government and public response. So we want to make sure that there's that partnership expectation, that it's real time and communicated when it needs to be. Your example of if there's a clear cut happening, or better question, how can a clear cut be justified? If we're looking to water shortages and the impacts that clear cuts cause, knowing that it impacts both flooding and drought, we can't be doing it in the face of this information, right? We talked about accountability lots, and then communication we've talked about, And finally, that it is funded. We need to make sure that where money, I heard Mayor Gondak say this once, what isn't funded isn't happening. So we have to make sure that we have a line of sight to funding. And like Alex said, there's lots of great work in this restoration and regenerative farming work that's local and will make us feel good. So as long as we can keep showing that we see this future and that we're committed to it as a community, we can start getting some legs to Bruce's vision. So I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd like to add is again, going back to this perspective idea that we have to look at this from the ecosystem point of view, from what is needed downstream, upstream of humans, essentially. That we can sort of keep focusing on us wanting more agriculture or wanting, to pump more oil or whatever, but those things have to be in the context of the ecosystem we live in. I mean, we get long, hot days here, and the sun isn't going to move off the horizon too far. I think we have to look at how we coexist with the environment we're actually in, and we're not doing that at all right now.
No, we're putting ourselves above 100%. We need to make sure that the we that we speak of needs to include all the fish, all the birds, all the leaves, everything. Definitely need to be less human-centric. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you guys just said. And I think what you were just touching on there, Bruce, in terms of understanding our latitude and longitude, our elevation, the historic environmental influences that are specific to each topographical region is crucial in terms of going forward with any sort of plan. And then understanding, the basic laws of thermodynamics, which is every action has an equal or opposite reaction. So if we choose to terraform or build a dam or alter the flora system, it's going to have its own environmental impacts on not only flora and fauna, and also the jet stream, So when it comes to micro scale, macro scale alterations to the natural world, those risks and repercussions need to be weighed out in terms of developing a long-term plan that is proactive and sustainable. So, that's where we need all hands on deck and experts from as many fields as possible to come together and coalesce and sort of almost T-funnel the metadata down to something that might actually work based on common agreements, where we could have as little negative environmental impact as predictably possible. Though it's never going to be an exact science, there's always going to be an effect. We can just hope that the effect will be more positive than negative. And I think that's, politics aside, that's as a people, that's kind of where we really need to just plant that seed, plant those ideas into people's heads, right? Because you can kill the guy, but you can't kill the idea, So if we can inspire people, right, to think creatively and outside of the box and come together, whatever their educational background or what have you, or skill level, then maybe over the long term, or at least in the next generation, we can have an inspirational impact that could secure the following generations. But at the same time, I think, as we were all saying, the time to act is now. But we do need to set those politics aside and just start providing information, sharing information with each other. So maybe there's a possibility we can start getting some of those things done and getting some funding.
Try to understand the world we live in, eh?
Yeah. It's kind of like be spatially aware, self-aware, and aware of your impact on your environment. And if we can do that successfully, then it's like even the example of the pipe burst, like 1.4 million people were actually responsible water stewards, You know, so if you can just provide enough information for people to exercise their choices, they can make better choices. You know, so
Yeah.
that was proof in the pudding that if it's done the right way, then people can exercise their own individual responsibilities and do the right thing. You know,
And water's worth more than gold.
100%.
Yeah.
You can't drink
that's
gold.
absolutely right. Yeah, there was an article on the head of the BOE a few months ago that said, follow the water. And to me, that was the signal right there that is more important than anything else. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Anything you want to close on, Bruce, before we wrap today?
No, have a good evening.
Thank you. You guys too. Have a good night.